Our reading this week is from Rays of the One Light, weekly readings on the Bible and Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Our Easter reading this week is entitled Resurrection for Every Soul. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramhansa Yogananda. In the Gospel of St. John, chapter 20, we read the inspiring account of Jesus' resurrection. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth, and cometh to Simon Peter, and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved, and saith unto them, They have taken away the Lord. Then the same day at evening, being the first day of the week, when the doors were shut where the disciples were assembled for fear of the Jews, came Jesus and stood in their midst, and saith unto them, Peace be unto you. The resurrection of Jesus, doubted by many, but affirmed by those who were close to him, was a miraculous event, though one not unique in history. For many great saints of other religions have appeared to their disciples after death. Sometimes their appearances have been, as that of Jesus was, in flesh and blood form, and not only in vision. Paramhansa Yogananda relates an autobiography of a yogi, the account of his guru, Sri Yukteswar's resurrection after his earthly passing. Miracles of this type are revealed only rarely to the masses, but accounts of them, related by men and women of reputed truthfulness, have inspired many devotees with faith in the reality of subtler than material states of existence. Resurrection, Yogananda explained, means transformation, ultimately, from any lower state of being to a higher one. Worldly consciousness cannot imagine such a transformation except in terms of, perhaps, an improvement of the present mess of pottage with the addition of a new flavoring. Divine consciousness, however, is capable of taking the base metal of worldliness and transforming it into the spiritual gold of divine wisdom and love. In keeping with this, the Bhagavad Gita in the 9th chapter tells us, Ah, ye who into this ill world are come, fleeting and false, set your faith fast on me. Fix heart and thought on me. Adore me. Bring offerings to me. Make me prostrations. Make me your supremest joy, and undivided, unto my rest your spirits will be guided. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Well, welcome everyone to Easter Sunday. It's a wonderful tradition that our culture has, born of Christianity, our roots in Christianity, that so many millions of people who might not otherwise do so on any consistent basis make the pilgrimage, as it were, to the shrine of our immortality. The story of Jesus' life has been described as the greatest story ever told. Well, no doubt that's a bit of an exaggeration. So is the idea that he our sins were saved by Jesus Christ. There's been plenty of sin ever since. So whatever that means, it's an affirmation, of course. But it's celebrated because not only is it connected with springtime, which itself is a relief, a celebration, a reaffirmation of renewal, and so forth, but because it resonates deeply with all of us. On our path here, the path of self-realization and with its essential practice of Kriya Yoga, Paramhansa Yogananda was asked, why do you place such emphasis on the Christian teachings, the Bible, and so forth. And all he would disclose in his lifetime, he said, rather, it was Babaji's wish that I do so. The connection in what we share and what we try to live and the practice of meditation and Kriya Yoga and these things is its connection with the life of Jesus is somewhat veiled to us. Yogananda seemingly refused to give us the key to the understanding of that connection. He gave it perhaps in the Christmas season when he claimed that the three wise men came from India and were no less than his own line of gurus, Lahiri Mahashai, Babaji himself, and Swami Sri Yukteswar, his direct guru. But whatever that connection is, because there are many forms by which our resurrection, our renewal, is celebrated in various faith traditions and so forth around the world at the time of spring. But this is a rather dramatic one, after all. Crucifixion and bodily resurrection is fairly confrontive, is a challenge to our materialistic nature. How can that be? I've never met anybody who resurrected themselves. It is a challenge to our faith. We could say, and I certainly have said, many I'm sure have said and thought, that, well, it could be just a symbol, and that's perfectly fine. It could be a metaphor for our resurrection of spirit, because it is also that. We can either set aside the literalness of the story or not, and if we do not, the story tells us that the power to achieve what we seek, happiness in life, satisfaction, contentment, peace of mind, all of these intangibles without which life is not worth living. You can be the richest person, the most famous person, the most powerful person, the most beautiful person, whatever. And history has shown the lives and testimony of those who have achieved these somewhat questionable achievements fleetingly, all testify that it wasn't enough. It wasn't what they really sought. Death itself, in any case, removes it from them, if not old age, illness, competition, and the vicissitudes of history. Only one testimony has been true, the testimony of the realization of God in our own hearts and minds and in our lives. And so the metaphor can be extended in more modern language, the modern language that we see of the victory of the human spirit over the challenges that we face. And challenges we do face, personally or culturally, in the world today, in our nation today. But it doesn't matter because the challenges are always there. Do you remember the story of the woman who came to Buddha, grieving for her lost child? And he said, and she asked for some form of comfort, and he said to her, "Woman, take some oil, or rather take a vessel and go out into the village and draw oil from each of the villagers, and I will help you." And then as she walked out the door, he said, "But do not take the oil of any family that has not experienced death." And of course we know, as she was to discover, she came back empty-handed. Because this is the very nature of our existence. Yes, we all will leave these bodies. Yes, we all will suffer from illness, do suffer disappointment, humiliation. Think, for example, if you can, yes, Jesus was nailed to a cross. Doesn't sound very enticing. But to someone of a refined consciousness, think of, and this is more common to us, probably none of us have been nailed to a cross, literally, but think of the humiliation in public, with friends, that occurs from time to time. Most people, when humiliated in that way, suffer greatly in their spirit. Imagine if you can, and it's a wonderful meditation. Great Christians, saints, and otherwise devotees have done this for 2,000 years. A meditation on what Jesus, as the living Christ, experienced. is a wonderful meditation, because we take so seriously the crucifixions we endure, which by contrast is, well, we each get what we deserve, I guess. But nonetheless, when we see that when we're faced with illness, the C word, or even humiliations of daily life, of ordinary life, when our spirit can rise above it, be non-attached, even-minded, even cheerful. Father, forgive them. Could you? How often do we and you forgive people who despise us, humiliate us, put us down, mostly in our own perceptions, probably not that often literally in front of us? It's our imaginings that bring more suffering probably than anything literal, because we are a spirit. And this is the message. It's in our attitude, it's in our spirit, it's in our consciousness that we acclaim victory. The drama of literally resurrecting a physical body that was declared dead is very dramatic. But the pathway to such power, the pathway to such victory, is not that mysterious. It's the victory of reclaiming our transcendence from the ups and downs of daily life. It's the path of non-attachment. It's the path of service, even when we're hurt, and so on. Yogananda once was asked, well, what do we give how do we make people a teacher or a minister? He said that those who can think of the needs of others, even whilst their own challenges and sufferings, and of course a certain amount of karmic predisposition towards that particular form of service. But that's what we look for. Those who can transcend their little crosses, which aren't little to you and I when we bear them, but those who can do that can rise above those challenges. This is the eternal message of springtime. I mean, the winter of our discontent, our despair, and our so on that we experience when we question our lives and their validity, when nobody around us accepts us, the winter of our challenges with the physical body and so on. The very winter gives to the earth the power of renewal. It's not unrelated. In Swami Kriyananda's, really one of his classic texts on the life of Jesus and of the teachings of the East, is called The Promise of Immortality. Now, it's interesting to me that in the Jewish tradition, their theology, I guess, although they don't use that term, at the time of the life of Jesus, there was two groups of people. There were the Sadducees, sort of like what we might call the Republicans. They were wealthy and quite literally minded. They didn't believe in an afterlife. You just be here now, and you know, if you have God's grace, if you become wealthy like me, and that sort of thing. But the more popular sect were the Pharisees, those rascals who constantly nipping at the heels of Jesus and his disciples. But the Pharisees were more popular, because they at least, not only believing their scriptures, but also at least held to the promise and to the value of the oral traditions that had come down. So in some ways, although they persecuted Jesus Christ, in some ways that was fitting, because in fact they believed in oral tradition. They were more open to spiritual teachers. The Sadducees were not. And so in that tradition, there was the concept of the resurrection of bodies from the graves, and it's even in the New Testament. But the understanding at such a relatively dark time of intelligence and awareness was such that that was the only way they could frame the discussion. Can you imagine bodies coming out of the graves after, how many thousands of years? It's just an absurd concept, and so forth. But what comes out of the graves, the grave of mortality, the grave of despair, the grave of illness, is that victorious spirit, that astral essence, that ghost-like ever living, ever conscious, ever new spirit. And the more we live with that sense, and yoga is wonderful in the sense that our focus on the energy that inhabits, which is the spirit that inhabits the physical body. Through our energization exercises, we learn to, at will, draw more energy into the physical frame. And behind that energy, we feel the joy. When you want energy and joy go hand in hand. A person who's despaired is paralyzed, has no energy, can't move. This is what depression is like. When you have energy, you have creativity, you have intelligence, you have willingness. This is, you might say, the psychological presence of divinity within us. But in the teachings of meditation and yoga, we understand that behind energy, there is a subtle feeling of joy. And the joy born of meditation, which is to take that awakened energy through the techniques and science of meditation and commune with that energy and extract from it like a spiritual alchemist the joy. And what is joy if not self-aware? What is joy if not conscious? And to dwell increasingly past the body, transcending, resurrecting the soul within that inhabits. Jesus said, I will destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days. And his disciples, who frankly weren't that bright, thought he was looking at the temple next door, the great temple of Jerusalem. But of course he wasn't. He was speaking of the resurrection of spirit. And the science of yoga and meditation comes to resurrect that spirit in a way that all people can experience. That it doesn't take a belief system, it doesn't take a religious affiliation, it doesn't take anything more than the willingness to open up to a reality which even modern science corroborates. That nothing is as it seems. Everything is more subtle and vibrant, and 1 gram of flesh, Yogananda would say in the early days of nuclear research, he said 1 gram of flesh could light the city of Chicago for a few days or a week. I forget what he said exactly. I don't know if that's literally true or not, but the principle is true. The principle of energy. We are people who think about energy. But the more subtle form of energy is the joy of the resurrection of the spirit which inhabits this temple. This is the true temple. This physical body evolved over millions of years to become capable of receiving the descent of the Spirit, the avatara, the descent, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Not just Jesus, the Christ, but Jesus, the Christ consciousness, the universal Christ which dwells in all creation, dwells within this body, was made flesh. And the awakening, the resurrecting of that spirit, any improvement that we make in our life is a kind of resurrecting of the power of our consciousness, our spirit, to overcome adversity. This is the eternal message of Easter. This is what resonates so deeply with us. And in the end, did Jesus suffer, is the question. It was one of the great controversies of early Christianity. The Gnostics, who were firmly committed to the divinity of Jesus, said, no, he didn't suffer. He was a divine being. He was the Son of God. Well, read the Gospels, my friend. If you take those literally, and we're supposed to, supposedly, he obviously did suffer. We say every week in our Festival of Light, we reiterate the divine promise from Krishna, who says, when vice dominates and virtue declines, I incarnate. Yes, Jesus was clearly united with the Father. He claimed to be so and paid the ultimate price, as it were, in terms of the ego at least, his own crucifixion. But he was not just that, and we are not just that. He may have realized it fully, and we may not have yet fully. But we are, as it were, of both natures, divine and human. in coming to earth, such a one who had no compulsion like you and I to work out our lesson plans, nonetheless took on mortality and accepted the limitations of mortality. And on that cross there was a fleeting moment when the inner freedom which such a one always experiences, as Yogananda said of himself, and all the great ones down through history have indicated, that freedom, that inner freedom, that contact with that Father, that bliss, was fleetingly withdrawn that he might experience the cross. And in that experience, yes, it's true that a great soul such as a Jesus, such as a living Christ, can take on the karma. That's not an untrue teaching. It's just that the world's been far from saved. It's that those, as St. John said, to as many as received him, even those that believeth on his name, it says, will be given the power to become the sons of God. Jesus is not different in kind. He was not something different than you and I, a divine puppet. He was a soul who, like you and I, carried our crosses down through the ages. He had achieved freedom, Yogananda claimed, in a past life. He did not come as Jesus, the man, with karma of his own to work out. But nonetheless, in that human nature, in taking that on and experiencing that, he did nonetheless, at least to those who are in tune with him, both then, his own close disciples, and down through the ages, the great saints like St. Francis and Teresa of Avila and others, any great devotee who attunes his spirit with the living, indwelling Christ within all of us, and through Jesus as a particular ray of light in that way, if that's your path, will come grace and protection. And thus it is, as a rich person can pay off the debts of his wayward but repentant son, as we help one another, we cook for one another, we do help each other when we're ill, as we can help one another on the metaphysical, spiritual level, we also help each other. In the last years of our founder's life, Swami Kriyananda, we saw that process happening, because despite the ravages of old age and so forth, he continued to travel, to lecture, to serve other people. And what was so interesting is, notwithstanding that burden, he would sometimes be unable to speak. Why? Not because of pain, but because of bliss, because of joy. This is the message of Easter, and it'll continue to inspire people down through the ages, because it's the lesson we all have to learn, to transcend our sorrows, our challenges, and even in the midst of our success, to remain even-minded, to affirm our spirit and our transcendence from this world with its ups and downs. This is the victorious life. This is the resurrected spirit. And this is what we celebrate today. I'd like to end with a reading from Yogananda, prayer. He says, as Christ resurrected his consciousness from beneath the sepulchre of bodily limitations, so must thou learn to resurrect thy mind from beneath the tomb of material desires. Resurrect thy thoughts by meditation from body confinement to the consciousness of joy. Resurrect thy divine love from beneath the sod of mundane human attachments. Resurrect thy calmness from beneath the soil of restlessness. Resurrect thy wisdom from beneath the earthliness of ignorance. As Jesus withdrew his mind from the body by ecstasy and united it with all-pervading spirit, so unite thy life with eternal life by constant meditation. Joy and happy Easter. And as they say in the Orthodox tradition when they greet one another at Easter, he has risen. And the response is, yes, indeed, he has risen. And so shall we.